Welcome to Stories from the Center of the Universe, the podcast about the human experience.
Jeff Tiegs, welcome to the Center of the Universe, or I should say welcome back to the Center of the Universe.
It is good to be back, yeah, and a whole new year.
Yeah, a whole new year. Has the new year been kind to you?
So far, January is recognized as Human Trafficking Awareness and Prevention Month. So the country and the world shines a spotlight on this crime that we look at throughout the year. So we do try to take that opportunity to jump onto that and help people understand what this crime is like. But interestingly, there was some angst too. You know, I've been in this fight for 8 years, right after I retired. And there's a lot of people in the space who are just like, look, we've had Human Trafficking Awareness Month since 2010, and we're losing every year. Can we stop like having this month and actually do something about it? So I'm conflicted, right? Because people are busy. Everyone has their own thing. I appreciate the fact that there's a name for it. There's a focus behind it. But I do also kind of sit on that camp of, man, how long are we just going to talk about this? You know, When are we really going to do something substantive? So yeah, that's how it's kicked off the year so far.
All right. Well, do you want to talk about Skull Games first? And then we'll touch on the book and then spend a lot of time talking about your Delta experiences, what you can talk about.
Whatever works, buddy. Yeah, whatever works.
Right, let me tell a story that I told just before we started recording. I work out with a buddy of mine 3 or 4 mornings a week, and we were about halfway through the workout, and he asked me from time to time about the podcast, and he said, "Who's coming on next?" And I said, "Well, Jeff Tiegs is coming on. I'm having him back on to talk about his book, his Delta Force experiences, and Skull Games." And I talked a little bit more about you, and then he goes, "What's his name again?" And I said, "Jeff Tiegs." He goes, "I'm reading a book by a guy named Jeff Tiegs. There's no way it's the same person." I'm like, "What's the name of the book?" And he goes, "Where Have All the Heroes Gone?" And by the way, since we're recording video, I'll show it.
Thank you. It's a good looking book.
Yeah, it is. Look at that. And there's your name at the bottom. And he found it independently.
Really?
Confirmed that he was not listening to me when I was talking about you a couple of months ago, because he found the book through another podcast you've been on. You've been on other podcasts, I assume.
I have, yeah.
And so he found you through one of those podcasts. I'm not sure which one it was, but yeah, I really enjoyed reading it, and he said very complimentary things without me. I mean, he had no reason to lie to me about that.
It's been a really cool trip. I mean, I think part of it is this, you know, the intent of the book changed over time, and the end result was something fairly complicated, right? Like I jump between stories and I try to weave these things together. It didn't start that way. It started very much A, B, C, D, you know, and as I developed and worked through this and studied, I had some mentors that helped me, you know, explore different ways of doing it. It was my fear at the end when I finally hit send and print this thing are people going to get lost? You know, like I'm jumping around a lot. Do I have enough connections? And yet I really trust that, and I enjoy movies, stories, books that they don't tell you everything, right? They allow you to figure it out and draw some of those connections. But that can be a tenuous balance. You don't want to lose the reader. So that was my biggest fear, was that I was jumping around too much and maybe not being clear enough on some of these things. But man, I've been super pleased. People have really enjoyed it. And then I was fearful of that with the audio, because it's one thing to have it in your hands, but to be driving or working out and listening to the audio. But people have really commented on how they enjoyed the jumping back and forth. You know, I tried to put those little cliffhangers in there. So the book's working, man. I couldn't be more pleased of, you know, just the effort that went into it, and folks like your buddy who find it and read it and they're enjoying it. It's really a neat relationship.
Yeah, I have to tell you, Jeff, I grew up, I've read not the entire Bible, but I've read a decent portion of it. And your telling of the David and Goliath story is the best telling I've ever heard. It's not even close. And I mean, do you know Dr. Tony Crisp?
I don't. I'm going to write that name down though right now.
I'll after the recording, I'll tell you about Tony. You guys are kindred spirits in a lot of ways. I can't tell you that there's been a better telling of the last days of Jesus.
Thank you.
You nailed. I mean, that's a horrible term, but you really, it's a horrible term, completely unintentional, pun not intended. It was a great telling. You had me. I could not put that section of the book down. I really could not. I had to go through the entire thing. And where do you get that from? Are you just you're good? You're a very good writer, but you have to have unbelievable research effort put into.
I'm studying and listening. So. Two things. One, I'm really glad you commented on the crucifixion piece, because that's moving to me. Like I found it interesting, and even the idea of a soldier. I was trying to break apart some of these stereotypes, and even like the Roman soldier, that guy wasn't a schlub. Yeah. I mean, especially these guys. These were seasoned professionals, and really studying at what that looked like, and even the nuances of fulfilling that prophecy. And we show the pictures of the nails in the hands all the time. Well, we know that's just not possible. Like you can't hang on that. So, all these things. So even the simple idea of, this was considered from here up was considered the hand back then. All these things. So I've really been digging into it for years. And I'm glad what you said, because I really am standing on the shoulders of people that have gone before me. So I've tried to put together dozens and dozens of different resources and references. I think it ended up being, I can't remember if it was 200 or 400 references,
Yeah.
But one of the things that's interesting, when I first set out to write the book, I did not want it to be a reference book, because I don't like those. I wanted it to be entertaining and engaging. And then I reached a point where I was like, geez, man, I'm just taking too much stuff from other people. I have to reference where these ideas came from. But what I hadn't done was taken very good notes. So I'm like, where did this come from? And I asked a friend of mine that's an author. I said, can I just quote Wikipedia? And they're like, well, I mean, you can. People really don't. Like, it's not really a viable source. I'm like, yeah, but this isn't a research paper. All I want to be able to do is point to the fact that I didn't make this up. Other people have said this. This is, if you consider Wikipedia common knowledge, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. I just want to make sure that this is referenced, that this isn't me. So half of the quotes in there, or the references, are Wikipedia. I don't know how many books are out there that quote Wikipedia as often as I do, but that was my point. It's like, dude, it's two guys talking, man. You think you want me to quote some paper from, the 14th century meeting of the popes? Like I'll just quote Wikipedia, and you can reference it and you can go back and forth. And then for those people that are have the digital copy, it's easier to go back and forth. I don't know if you picked up on this at all. There's all sorts of little Easter eggs in there as well with the referencing, things that I thought of. Like, for example, one of the titles is called "This Woman's Work." And that's a Kate Bush song. And it makes me cry almost every time I hear the song, because it's just this, So, if you didn't catch it, you can go through it again, or those of you that are picking up the book, there's all sorts of Easter eggs that are referenced in the back that just didn't make sense to fit into the main body,
Gotcha. One of the other stories that really stuck with me was not a biblical story. It was one of your combat stories, and I don't remember if you were in Iraq or Afghanistan, or maybe I'm pretty sure it was one of those two. And you had a wounded soldier. You were the lead. You were in command of the action, but this guy was wounded, and you were the closest one to him, and you were tormented about whether to provide first aid or to be entirely focused on the mission at hand. And you eventually made the decision to go save the guy. I'm laughing because you said, obviously you wanted to move sideways because that's where your protection was. And all you could think was, please don't hit my balls. Don't hit my balls. I mean, I laughed out loud when I read that.
Well, and because you can relate, right? Like, and I think we often in our lives, we often make these quick deals with God, and that was my deal with God. I was like, look, I'm going to go out and get this kid. I do not mind getting shot. I don't want to die. And I don't want to get shot in the balls like that. Though, can we just have a quick agreement? And I felt like we did a little fist bump. and I ran out there. But the thing that was interesting too, that's hard. It's really hard to explain, is that I was much more concerned about getting shot and waking up in the hospital with all my men around me going, "Hey, hero," because it's, I make this joke like, "Hey, going and saving a wounded guy, that's NCO business. That's not officer business," and I say that tongue in cheek, but there's also a reality to it. Like, the officer is not supposed to be bogged down into that level of the fight. Like, there's a whole bunch of things happening that I'm the only one talking to these different assets and controlling all that. So if I'm running around playing hero, that's the one job I'm supposed to be doing, I'm not doing. But like you read in the book, I looked around, there was no one else. And man, this kid, they just kept shooting this kid. And you just had to make the move. And I didn't get shot in the balls.
I imagine your life would have taken a really bad turn, or certainly a turn anyway.
Yeah. It would be different. Yeah.
Yeah, I can only imagine. All right. So the book is, I highly recommend it. If you want me to talk about it in other ways, I certainly am willing to. In fact, I'll bring it up when I talk to other people. That's how good the book is. So, Jeff, I'm really glad I met you. I'm really glad you wrote this book, and I'm glad I took the opportunity to read it.
Thank you. I'm working on a sequel. I don't know what the name is. It might be a little too cheesy. Where have all the heroes gone to? I don't know, but it'll go much faster because I have the template. I'm gonna, I already have the outline. I have the stories. I have another 25 chapters of stories to tell, same style, and I'm paying attention now. I'm referencing my start points from Jump Street. So I have a whole bunch of stuff to share again.
Your Wikipedia references.
Yeah. Well, and some of the deeper ones, because you never want to shortchange somebody, and even the Yahweh story of the holy breath. I don't remember there's only been two people that I've heard reference that. One was Richard Rohr, and one was Bell. What's his name? Rob Bell. And you can like those guys or not like those guys. I don't remember which one I heard talk about it first, but it floored me, dude. Like, yeah. Like you're saying, I've been a believer all my life, and no one has ever talked about that idea that God's breath, his name, is the sound of your breathing, and how that's all interconnected between plants and animals and humans. And I mean, that changed my life. And I'm hoping, people are reading that and it's changing their life. But again, I didn't come up with it. I was just as floored as some people are, but I'm honored for someone to say, this guy, Jeff Tiegs, said, yeah, that's cool. I'll take that, even though it was years and years before I found out. Yeah.
Well, let me ask the title. What does the title mean to you, and why did you go with that title?
The original title was "There's Always More to the Story," because it really was focused on the Bible and the additional things. It was almost like an homage to Paul Harvey. Remember the rest of the story? Good Day. Yeah. I used to love that as a kid, and I read those books, and then his son carried on afterwards. That's what the title was for years. And then when I started to throw in some of my own stories, I was trying to come up with some different ideas. And quite honestly, I think the company that I worked with, Scribe Media, I think they helped me come up with the title, and they helped me come up with the cover art, both of which I think are just beautiful. And I think part of the title came about when I really narrowed down, like, who am I writing to? And you hear people say this all the time. Who's your audience? Who's your target audience? Who's your target audience? And I really realized it was my two boys. They're in their mid-20s. I've raised them as believers. They've lived in Israel. They know a bunch of these stories, but there's a lot of stuff that they haven't taken the time to dig into. There's certainly a lot of stuff. As I was writing my military stories, it almost became like, hey guys, this is what I was doing. This is why I missed so many of your birthdays. This is why you were home alone with mom for so long. And I'm the guy that gets the little ribbons on my uniform, you know what I mean? And all this type of stuff. But in many ways, my sons and my wife and my family and the people that really kept things together, they're my heroes, and that was heroic. And I think if we could focus on that a little bit more, redefine what heroism is, I think we're a little bit out of whack on what we look up to. Mothering, fathering, friendship, honesty, family. To keep that together in this day and age is something, to me, incredibly heroic. And my boys did not follow my footsteps. They are not in the military. They will not go into the military. But they are some of the kindest, gentlest, bravest young men that I've ever met. And they don't need to test themselves in war. And I'm glad I was able to pass that on to them. And both of them have read it and came back to me and said, I get it now. My brother, I was largely estranged from my brother because there's a cost. My job for 10, 15 years was to take men and women into combat and bring them home to their families. And that's literally a life and death responsibility. So my boys got the best part of me after that. My wife got second. And then there was a distance between second and third when it came to my family and brother and sister. And I had a discussion with my brother just a few weeks ago. And he said, "Hey, I get it. I was hurt. It hurt me. You didn't talk. You didn't call. It seemed like you forgot about us. I was resentful." He's like, "But I get it. And, I love you." And, dude, that's the power of a book, right?
Wow, that's awesome. That's amazing. That's one of the outcomes.
Yeah. And same with my boys, because we sheltered them, they knew I was a commando, they knew I was going back and forth to war, but they were little boys.
Yeah.
So yeah, it has improved all my relationships. And again, I thank God that he's given me the time to just explain some of this to people, I had another call a couple weeks ago. Bill, that's in there. He's a good friend. And, he was my best friend for years, and his mom read the book, and she called me and she said, I want to thank you for representing Billy. Like you got him, so when you read about Billy and his just deadpan remarks and his quiet confidence, just an incredible guy. So it's the same thing. Like how do you put a price on the idea that your mother and father and brother and sister and sons and wife know you a little more, and have a little bit more grace for all of this, the anger that I've had or the different things that have crept into our life. And then being able to honor some of my mates that are no longer here and have their parents acknowledge that. Bro, could we be more humbled? Praise God.
Bill sounds like an amazing guy. Obviously he left the world too early. And that reminds me of the snake bite story and your arm swelling up at Best Ranger competition. How did that competition end for you and Bill?
I had to pull out. So yeah, as soon as we reported that I had been bit by a snake, because I wanted to get an opinion from a medic, that the medic showed up and said, "Hey man, you can't continue." And I by that time I felt fine, but he explained to me, these small, I think it was water moccasin. I can't remember if it was water moccasin or coppermouth. These small snakes, they don't regulate the amount of venom they put into you. So we don't know how much venom is in you, and you could be out there on the land nav course, humping through the woods at 2 a.m. and it can hit your heart and that's it. There's no one there that can help you. So, I laid down in a tent with a guy observing me and slept for a few hours until I was in the clear. They had all different antivenoms lined up because at that time we weren't sure what type of snake it was that bit me. Billy lay down next to me on the floor. I was on a cot. He took a nap. And then we woke up and cheered our buddies on for the rest of the competition.
Yeah, that's a bummer, especially for you and Bill's personalities. That's the last thing you want to do is quit.
Yeah, it does. It feels like unfinished business, but when you're able to say, wow, we were winning Best Ranger one year, but I got bit by a snake. That's better than I just wussed out and fell into second place.
Bitten by a venomous snake that could have put enough venom in me to kill me 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
So how many times did you compete in best riding?
Twice. Okay. Twice, and I coached once. Yeah.
Okay. How'd you do the other time?
The first time the very first time I was a young corporal, I think, and we took 8th. And then I coached a team to 2nd, I believe. That was right when I was getting out. And then the one with Billy, I had to drop out. Yeah. So yeah. And it's a soft spot in my heart. I mean, it's if people are ever in that area during that time frame, it's a wonderful event to witness and notice, and just the patriotism is through the roof.
Yeah, like no other time and location on earth, probably, when that's going on. All right, last question on the book, and I'm certainly open to talking about the book more if you want. But from the time you had the idea for the book to the date of publication, when the book actually was published, because did the book come out first, or did the audio, or they come out the same day?
They came out around the same. They were all done the same time. The audio lagged in development, but by and large they were done the same. So from the very, very start, dude, I would say, man, 2009 was when the seed was planted. That's when I was at the Valley of Elah, and I tell that story of, they had the idea wrong where the Israelites were lined up in the Philistines. So I had started doing the investigating in 2009. And then when we lived in Israel, 2012 and 13, did more digging. I don't even remember when I started writing. So I would say probably seriously, I started writing probably after I got out in 2015. So the idea was 2009 to 23. Wow. When you think of it that way, a 14-year idea. And then the writing process was probably a good 5-6 years, with really one solid year of like, okay, because what I ended up doing was I had a version of the book written, and then I went to this writing workshop and kind of got educated on different ideas, went back to the start, and then went forward. So I think this second version, I can do it all in a year. Yeah.
What's your process for writing?
I kind of go with the flow. So one of the things that I don't have in place right now, but they really try to emphasize is just to write, and the first thing you do is you put a process together. So you have an outline, you have a template, you got the points that you're trying to make, and then you just start writing. And it's almost like a rough draft, almost just write, and you want to write 250, 500 words a day, and just write it, just to get it out onto that piece of paper. And then you go back in and revise everything. That's the process that I'm in now, but I'm also in that research process. So there are days where I won't get any writing in because I'll just be, but it's to me, it's like a treasure hunt. So just like you, sometimes I hope it feels like I'm kind of taking you on this treasure hunt,
yep.
Like I'm on that hunt first. It takes me days and weeks and months to keep kicking over rocks and being like, oh, I don't think that's right, or that's a dead end, or even honestly praying and asking God to just kind of guide me. And what I really love about retirement is you kind of go with the flow. Like if I sit down and I start writing one day and I'm into it and it's working, I'll go as long as I can. And other days I'll sit down and I'll start writing and it's just a chore, and then I'll just stop. So that's, I like that. I don't know. It's hard for people to have that as a battle rhythm. But again, I like being retired at the age that I am. That's how I am with most stuff now. It's how I work out. If I feel like it that day, I'll just keep on going. If it just isn't there, I'll go back home and have a cup of coffee. So there's just a different type of discipline.
Yeah, I imagine there's a part of the book that you enjoyed extremely, and then there were probably another part or two that you're like, this is not really my jam, but it belongs in the book, but here it is, and I got through it.
Well, I think there's a couple things there. So one is it really did start out as the exploration of these Bible stories, and that was like, that was its own thing. That was really fun. And then when I started to bring in these military stories, that became very cathartic for me. Like I didn't realize that I felt like I needed to get this out, and this is a real tenuous thing, right? Like when coming from Delta Force, we don't write books. We don't go on podcasts like that. That's the general rule. We don't do that, and you hear these guys are like, oh, I felt compelled. And I'm one of those guys now. I'm like, I feel compelled to say something, but I don't feel compelled to say something about me. I feel compelled to say something about this faith journey. Again, the Bible, the battlefield, and home, and these things that our guys are struggling with. So that ended up being very cathartic, which I didn't realize. And there were versions in there where I was mad, and I was naming names, and I was, I had some resentment, and I got over it, and then even that one where I talk about early on with Private Hale in Panama, and he didn't, I felt on many levels very, very betrayed. This guy was supposed to engage at this guard check, and he didn't. And I find out the next morning that he doesn't feel like he's got what it takes to kill a man. And I tell you, man, it wasn't until I was writing that story 30 years later that I realized, yeah, I have a right to be indignant about this. Like but part of it was I was worried about how it reflected on me. You know what I mean? Like he was my guy. I was his team leader and he wasn't ready. How does that reflect on me? And I had to own that. Like I had to own the fact that I've been kind of pissed off at this kid for 30 years for failing to be the Ranger that I expected him to be. But part of that reality was I felt it reflected on me, and that's one of those stories I hope people really take to heart, because that's one of those things that really drives me nuts is when you see fathers living vicariously through their children.
Yeah.
Which we say that doesn't sound that bad, living vicariously, but no, it's when your kid does something and you think it reflects on you. If they're good at a sport, that looks good on you. If they're good at school, that looks good on you. If they behave appropriately, that looks good on you. And man, and I warn fathers, if you're ever thinking about one of your kids on how whatever it is they're doing reflects on you, stop it. You're going down a terrible path.
It's not healthy for anybody.
Yes. Yeah. So, I tell that story with Hale. I tell that story with the 2-star officer on target. I was mad at that guy.
I'm mad at him reading it.
Yeah. But the thing is, I clearly think that I'm in the right in many ways, but I also understand and recognize what might have been going through this man's head is I'm a 2-star officer. If I get killed on this battlefield in Afghanistan, that is a note in history for all time. What that can do to set back this war. So I give that guy some grace. If he ever reads the book, he knows who he is. I'd love to sit down and have this discussion where, because you realize you're doing two competing things. Even the job of a Delta Force operator is counterterrorism. And much of what we were doing was counterinsurgency or even nation building. I can remember when I was in Special Forces in 10th Group, we were in Samara, and I lived in Samara for, I think it was 8 months. And Delta Force came in and they killed some dudes. They captured some guys. They just made a mess. And I thought, guys, like I live here. Whatever you want to know, just ask me. But my op cycle was counterinsurgency, right? Their op cycle was counterterrorism. So those things come at loggerheads and they move at different op cycles. One of the very first things I ever did when I got to the unit and I was working in an operations job was trying to figure out how to make these two cycles work. A counterinsurgency cycle works on 72 hours at the fastest, like that whole churn between targeting, getting out there. It really works on almost like a weekly cycle. Whereas a Delta Force counterterrorism cycle, it's 24 hours, if not 12 hours. So you got to figure out how to keep this spin as a counterterrorism as this counterinsurgency continues to move. So, there are things that are often at odds, and a young tactical commander on the battlefield and a higher ranking strategic commander up at headquarters, those things often clash. And I'll tell you, I welcome those stories or that discussion at any time. But what I would also say again, and this may be me getting too big for, bigger for my britches. We didn't lose tactical fights. We lost the strategic fight.
Yep.
So where's the disconnect? If we're winning every tactical battle, but losing strategically, somebody's missing the boat. And to me, I think too often our military leaders are looking up on how is this going to reflect on them. Again, how does this reflect on me for my career afterwards or in politics or in business or whatever, versus, man, you need to listen to your warfighters. You need to listen to these troop commanders and these platoon sergeants, these platoon leaders and these company these first sergeants. You need to listen to them. And when they tell you the Afghans are not ready to get their country handed over to them, you need to listen. When the ambassador tells you that the Afghans are ready, you need to take that with a grain of salt. So again, one of the things I'm hoping is people understand and recognize these innate frictions between all this different stuff, and we just sit down and talk.
Yeah, a good leader is going to be listening to peers, his subordinates, and his superiors, and taking it all in and making an assessment and making a decision and then moving. I will say that from my perspective, the typical path to climb a ladder, whether it's in the military or it's corporate America or even a small business, climbing that ladder, somebody has to make the decision to allow you to get to that next level or that next rung. And yeah, they fall in the trap of trying to be pleasing to all of those who can influence that decision. And the private or the specialist, they really, many of them don't care. Now, the best leaders, and there are 4 stars out there, I'm sure, certainly 1 and 2 stars that actually do listen and they make the best leaders, but those are the exception, not the rule, typically.
And that goes back again to where, with your question of the title and where have all the heroes gone, that was the thing that I understood of this disconnect, where it's like, do you not understand like how I see my duty and my role? You advertise we need people like this for this job, and I went through assessment and selection, and you trained me, and now I'm here doing it. And you expect me to be somebody else or expect me to do something else? Like what is that disconnect? And that's the same way again when you have a young man or a daughter. I'll use young men because they're my boys. Like, dude, a teenage boy, he's figuring it out. He's going to be rebellious. He's going to take risks. Like that's his role in life as a teenage boy. So why would you ask him to be something that he isn't, and to me as a father in that strategic space, I'm trying to let my kids survive in some of these knucklehead tactical decisions that they're making. And again, I think we've got some granddaughter. I have a granddaughter now, and we've got daughters-in-law, and even that dynamic is like, man, you need to understand how men and women, boys and girls grow up. And if you can create that safe place for them to just explore and make mistakes, and that's what I'm hoping people that aren't soldiers, that's what they get out of it. That's what I felt like I did in war, is I created a safe place with men and women that I trusted. They had their left and right limits, and anything in between that, man, do what you think is right, and we'll come out on the other side okay.
Yeah. Thanks for reminding me of the 2-star. And I think, that set of stories, because he was with you. I think if I recall correctly, he was with you for more than a couple of days, right?
I think it was maybe 36 hours. I think he came in one night, and then he definitely spent the full day, trying to get this target hit. Yeah.
Yeah. And did he think he was helping by being there?
I don't know. I think there came a time when it became the thing to do for these higher officers, where they would come out on the battlefield, and on one level it was appreciated. Like, hey, the boss is here, he gets to see what it is we're doing. Hopefully they understand it. But I don't know. I never had good experiences with it, because To fight and win on the battlefield is ugly. It's brutal. It's blood, guts, dirt, fire, pain, noise. It's ugly. And unless you are a 1, 2, 3-star officer that appreciates that, it's going to come as a shock and you're not going to like it. And you're going to have a hard time taking what you just witnessed, which is dirty and violent and brutal, and taking it into this boardroom of this, technology center, or where you're sitting around on these marble floors and cushiony things discussing it. So I think that perhaps these leaders we have in position now, these 1, 2, and 3-star officers, they fought, so they know what it means. They know what it's like to literally be up to your knees in blood and guts and continuing to drive on. They know what it's like to take a life or to lose a man next to you. So I think there's a different relationship there. This generation of men that were controlling the outcome of the war back then, they never fought. These 2 and 3-star general officers that ran Afghanistan and Iraq, they didn't fight. So again, this is me and my opinion. And these are the things that I'm wrestling with. And I hope that these men who are smarter than me, and much more experienced in the geopolitics and the strategic look, don't lose sight of this. Otherwise, we're going to repeat these mistakes. And we're going to have this huge disconnect between the men and women fighting the tactical fight on the ground and what we think is happening strategically and politically. And we're going to lose again. We don't have a very good record.
Certainly not in our lifetime.
Save these little excursions like Grenada and Panama. Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan. We haven't won anything lately. And somebody needs to take a look at that.
Yeah. And we don't, the last thing anybody rational wants is war. I don't think it sounds like you, and you should value those experiences, but you'd rather be writing a book in Oregon, right?
Yeah, it's a hard one to answer because, those of us that feel that we were born to go to war, born to fight. It's not that we want it, but it's like it's if it's going to be there, we need to be there, kind of a thing.
It's like practicing a sport and never playing in a game.
Yeah. So it's hard. It's really hard to explain. And I'm working on another book, a fiction book with a friend of mine, because you never could get this pull this off in nonfiction. But what we're trying to convey in this fiction book is war is still a viable decision. Violence is a viable decision, but there are no half measures. Yeah. You know what I mean? I went to the Army Museum last year it's a brand new one up in Virginia, Fort Myers or something. I can't remember where it's at. Army Museum.
Just outside DC.
Yeah. Somewhere. Yeah. Just outside DC. And you're going through the Army Museum and you're seeing the Revolutionary War and the Civil War and World War I and World War II. And you're talking about like total war. Like we're in. Like the D-Day invasion, that was all the chips, man. We're in, and then you get to Korea and Vietnam and, the wars that I was involved in. And dude, I was depressed because you can see this shift of like, look, we don't want to go to war, but if we're gonna bring to bear everything we can to finish this quickly and decisively. Think of the Civil War was 4-ish years. World War II was 4-ish years. A global war was 4-ish years. We dicked around in Afghanistan for 20 years. So warfare and violence are both very, very viable means of a political end or as a solution. We just have to do it the way history has shown us succeeds.
Yeah. And we could talk for hours about why we seem to, as a society and the people that lead our government are making decisions that end up just simply being half measures,
Yeah.
or not even half measures, quarter measures.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. World War II, we put all of our chips in, and we won, and it didn't last as long as it could have. Like, could you imagine the Third Reich existing? Hitler exists. Hitler is trying to take over the world. He's got the Italians that are, I guess, helping a little bit, and then certainly the Japanese kept us busy in the Pacific. Could you imagine half measuring through that?
No.
We'd all be speaking German right now.
Yeah. And I get it. That was an existential threat. Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, those were not existential threats to America. I get it. But with that being a fact, should we go in?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't have to be an existential threat to go to war. But to me, the simple fact remains, if you're going to go to war, you're going to go to war, and you're going to win it decisively and quickly. And that's just not bargaining. And if you're not willing to win it decisively and quickly, then use all other means of diplomatic power and economic power to get what it is you want out of the situation.
Yeah. All right. I'm awkwardly transitioning to Skull Games.
Yeah.
Are we effectively waging a war against sex trafficking as a world?
It's actually a good segue, because it's the same thing. We talk about it and we aren't doing anything. You know what I mean? People want to, people get emotional about it for a minute or two. There is very little to any, like negligible dollars are going into countering sex trafficking in the United States. When you talk about the United States budget, that's looking at human trafficking, and that's the umbrella I'm using. So you have human trafficking. That's the big umbrella. You split that in half. Part of it is sex trafficking, and part of it is labor trafficking. So the preponderance of dollars that the U.S. is spending is going overseas, and it's going into labor trafficking. And I have a very simple theory on that, because if you can demonstrate that some sort of company is violating labor laws, you have something to sue. You have something to take. When you identify that somebody is being sexually abused, you don't have anyone to sue. You don't have anything to take. So we have this really crazy problem where we talk about sex trafficking and then conflate it to human trafficking, and the money goes to labor trafficking, goes to overseas. So it's January Human Trafficking Awareness Month. It's back on the spotlight, and you'll have a politician stand up and say X, Y, and Z, and then we'll forget about it for the next 11 months. We are losing. I've been at this for 8 years. It's getting worse. It's growing. There is more younger people that are vulnerable. And the other thing that we conflate, we use these terms to create emotion, is pedophile, right? Oh, pedophile. Just like, Jeffrey Epstein, the pedophile. Look, Jeffrey Epstein had sex with underage girls. That's not a pedophile. Okay. And I'm not trying to be a jerk and like mincing terms, but it's like, look, recognize when you're being manipulated. Everyone hates a pedophile, because when you say pedophile, you're thinking of somebody, a grown man who wants to have sex with a prepubescent child. That's a pedophile. And they do exist out there, but it's not a big market. Jeffrey Epstein was not, by definition, a pedophile. He abused underage women. He abused minors, and he certainly abused women of age as well. And that's the thing that people keep conflating and mixing it up back and forth and back and forth. What we do at Skull Games is the underground commercial sex economy. There is an economy, a multi-billion-dollar economy, where women are being sold online. I say women and children largely so someone would listen to me. Okay. There are children that are being sold, but it's very, very difficult to combat. And my argument is, just like the tactician that I am in the military, let's get in where we can find it. These women that are predominantly between the ages of 18 and 23, millions of sex ads a day are online. 150,000 new sex ads are introduced each day. That's our start point. That's our known point. So when we go in at these women that are being advertised for sale, we go one of two ways, or both. We take a left and we start looking for the minors, or we start looking for when these girls were minors, when they were first approached by these predators, or we take a right and we start looking for who it is that's exploiting them. you've got to get these traffickers off the battlefield. They have such a hook, and they are so controlling of these girls in every way imaginable. And we can talk about a few of those, that unless you're putting them away for a long time, you are not going to restore these women. They're broken and they're fearful, and they cannot have the space available for other things that come into play. Again, this going back and forth between these two pieces. As a counterterrorism professional, I felt that my job was to bring the baseline level of violence down just enough so other elements could work. Regular military, economic incentives, all these things, social incentives, all these other things. If there's a heightened level of violence where you can't even get someone in to repair the plumbing, what are we supposed to do? So that was my job, was to get that baseline level of violence down. And we did our job, but nobody ever came back in. And that's the same thing we're trying to do with Skull Games, is we're trying to get to this place where we can get the baseline level of violence down on these women that we've recognized and identified that are being abused by putting pressure on their trafficker, or putting their trafficker behind bars for a short period of time or a long period of time. And it allows all of these other elements of power to come in to help her restore. So when we talk about trafficking, I consider Skull Games a counter-trafficking organization. I equate that to counterterrorism. When you were in the military, do you remember having to do the online anti-terrorism training where you kind of walk through? Yeah. So just like I literally stole the definitions from the joint pub between anti-terrorism and counterterrorism, and equated it to counterterrorism, counter-trafficking and anti-trafficking. Anti-trafficking, everyone needs to know what the risks are. Like you need to know what the risks are for yourself and for your family and for your community. And there's a lot of organizations that do that. It's not what we do. I'm a counter trafficking guy, just like I was a counterterrorism guy. We partner with organizations, law enforcement organizations, and we provide them the right information at the right place at the right time to interdict this crime. And that's a very, very unique thing. And I think we're onto something that can scale at a national level. And before I am done with this effort, I got another 8 to 10 years in me, and then it's going to have to be off, riding off into the sunset. I'm hoping that we've got something in place to replicate it and keep it going.
And so your organization is the only one that's really doing the counter trafficking?
There's a couple. There's a couple that are doing things similarly. I would go so bold as to say none of them, any of your listeners would be able to say, none of them that are well known. The biggest, loudest clanging gongs in the anti-trafficking space that claim they're doing counter trafficking, they aren't. And I just ask people to show numbers, man. I've got my numbers in front of me. With the last 6 months of 2023, which was that's when we stood up independently as Skull Games. 73 predators are behind bars.
That's awesome.
Hey, and this is the thing that I challenge listeners to do. When you are interested in anti-trafficking or counter-trafficking, look, anti-trafficking, people that raise awareness, people that talk in schools, people that offer, restoration and safe houses for women, go for it. Got it. But if you're interested in counter trafficking and you're talking to someone or you're looking to an organization, have them show you their numbers. We've put over 5,000 investigative hours into law enforcement investigations. 5,000, 400 leads we've pushed. This is in 6 months. 400 leads, 200 of them have been developed beyond the case of probable cause, reasonable suspicion. 73 arrests, and our biggest case, the guy got 249 years.
Wow.
So I don't know what else to say, and I don't mean to sound a little bit grumpy, but I'm a little bit grumpy. Okay. I am a firm believer there is an infinite amount of support out there. There's an infinite amount of money in the United States for this. There is. I mean, the wealth that our country has created and the pockets of wealth around our country. It's not being applied to counter trafficking. It's not being applied correctly, and it's being wasted incredibly on these organizations that are saying that they're doing stuff that they're not. So again, people can be like, what's with this grumpy guy? Look, I'm grumpy because I've been at this 8 years and I've been having to compete with these other organizations that are getting the lion's share of the press, the lion's share of the donations, and if not simply wasting it, being fraudulent with it. So I don't know if you're going to get this out in Human Trafficking Awareness Month, but anyone who's interested in the fight, take a look at us, take a look at any other organization. And there's a couple out there that have solid numbers, that are truthful numbers. But also don't equate what's happening overseas with what's happening in the United States. Those are two different animals. I can go to some third world country and walk into the police station with a pocket full of cash and start doing counter trafficking operations, but to build something there that's worthwhile and has longevity, there are some groups that are doing that well. To do that here in the United States, it's its own monster.
So you mentioned online and you're talking about, and it sounds like Skull Games is entirely, and tell me if I'm wrong here, entirely oriented on U.S. human trafficking. There have to be, through online webs, there have to be connections to other countries, though. You just stop once you run into another country or somebody that's a citizen of another country and not a citizen here, and they've never been to this country. Does the research stop? Does the effort stop at that national line?
Yeah, no, it doesn't stop, but it's not something we're pursuing. You know what I mean? So there's a start point and an end point that we're working within. That start point is usually some sort of commercial sex ad or some sort of tip that this woman, this child, this boy is for sale. That's our start point. And because somebody is going to buy that person, there has to be some sort of connectivity, an email or a phone number or something. And they use VoIP and they mask their emails. It's not easy. It's a game. That's why it's called Skull Games. It's a game. We're trying to outrun them, Yeah. So that's our start point. And the end point is getting that information to a law enforcement partner. So we haven't actively been recruiting partners overseas. We have some, and we will over time, as this grows and matures in the United States. I will pursue this in other countries as well. All you need for Skull Games to be effective is a functioning internet system where there's a commercial trade on the internet. If you have commercial trade on the internet, you're going to have humans being sold. So any place that's happened. Now it's going to be more of the developed world. In Europe, in the West, I'd love to take our counter trafficking strategies to Israel. In some of those places. So by and large, when we do find something that has an international access, we'll push it to our federal friends, FBI or Homeland Security. But because we're not really looking for it, we don't really see it that often. And there aren't really a lot of domestic traffickers, pimps that are running girls overseas. Not to include, back and forth across the Mexican border. That's its own little thing.
Yeah, so 6 months, 73 arrests. I mean, I would say, and you're learning all the time, right? You're getting better as each day and each week passes. And I say you, I mean the organization. How many folks work at Skull Games, roughly?
So there's two ways that we look at it. We call it Skull Games Incorporated. That's the staff. And dude, we have 4 full-time staff. That's it. We have 4 full-time staff. That's all we can afford. I would love to double that in 2024. But that, and it's really all of our overhead is salaries. I mean, and when I talk salaries, that's programs. Our Intel director, all she does is Intel. So when you're paying her salary, you're paying into our Intel program, our ops, all that type of deal. So we have 4 full-time staff. We call that Skull Games Incorporated. And then we have another aspect of Skull Games that we call the task force. And that is where we have brought in a vetted crowdsourcing model. So we recognize there are talented people all across the United States and that have been trained in open source intel. So OSINT is what we specialize in, open source intel. And for people that don't know what that is, that's anything that sits on the internet that has been put there by yourself freely. It isn't some proprietary database. You don't need a warrant or a subpoena to access that information. It's mostly coming off of social media. Now, there are things that leak, right? Like when some of these things leak, like when Ashley Madison, that website where all all those people had those accounts that were having illicit affairs. When those emails and names leak, that's a treasure trove of information, because what people do is they have this secret life, and there's a name, they have a name that they use, a username or an email that they use. And then they have their real life. And that's what we're trying to connect often. And that's the mistakes that we're trying to find, is somebody where their secret life bleeds into their real life that we can see. So we have 400 vetted volunteers as part of the task force. About 200 of them are actively engaged, and about 20 of them are engaged every week. So we are hunting and supporting operations just about every week. It's usually virtually. So a law enforcement partner that we have that's going to conduct an operation, we'll give them the start points that they need. We'll vet the information that they think they already have, and then we will be standing by. We use a Slack channel to do it. So if you were a cop and you were out doing an operation, we're connected, just like you and I are right now, talking 5-8 people on the backside, digging into this information. We just had an op in Texas last week. I don't remember the numbers on that. I think 5 guys were arrested and 3 women were recovered. And then a couple weeks prior to that, it was 7. That's about the time frame. That's about the numbers that we're looking. We've got a big event coming up in next week. So I take off tomorrow, and the end of this weekend, we'll be hunting somewhere, and we're expecting double digits for that. And then kind of continuing on. So we're on a 2-week hunting spree, because it's efficient and effective when we're able to do things virtually, but nothing's the same as meeting in person. Like the day you and I get to sit and drink coffee together in person is just a very different feel than having a relationship like this.
Yeah, the StreamYard thing, the Zoom thing, and the whole virtual world. It's you said it is efficient, but man, it's not fulfilling.
Yeah,
it really isn't.
So that's why we'll have these, we'll support law enforcement just about every week. And then we have these big task force events where everyone comes together, and it's almost like a celebration, So our next one is in April. It'll be down in Tampa, where we'll bring in, it'll be 100, 200 people will all come in, and then we'll hunt. So we'll spend 2 days hunting on a Saturday and a Sunday. They'll come in, we'll have the start points, we'll have the cities that we're hunting, we'll have the connectivity with the law enforcement. And then that's again, one of the reasons we call it Skull Games, because the teams will compete for the information. Who can find the best information to protect and recover this girl? Who can find the best information on this person of interest and pass that to law enforcement? So on a weekend, we're coming out with 50, 60, 70 lead packets to push to law enforcement. And that lead packet always has the positive ID of the victim, because that was our start point. And then about 30% of them were able to figure out who her trafficker is as well. So that's what we're trying to find, that balance is a weekly operational support, and then a quarterly kind of celebration where we can all come together. And that's also where I open up the tent to any other organizations. If somebody's interested in this, we open up applications in February. So you can apply on our website to be trained in the OSINT and be part of the Skull Games Task Force. We put you through a background check and some different training events virtually, and then you come to the live event. Same with these other nonprofits that are working in this space. If you guys want to collaborate, it's very difficult to bring 2 organizations together, but it's why we've created this big tent of the Skull Games Task Force, where we can come together over the course of a couple days. You can learn to see what it is we do, whatever you want to share with us, and we'll both leave there much more effective and efficient in countering this crime.
You mentioned 73 have been arrested in the last 6 months of last year. Do you have any sense of how many traffickers there are in this country? Like out of what's the population of the U.S.? 350 million now?
Yeah. Probably somewhere around 100,000, 150,000, I'm guessing.
It makes me nauseous to think about that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And they're all going to be at different levels, so when I say a trafficker, that's some people, it's the same as a pimp, right? So that's what we're looking at. And statistically, a pimp has about 5 or 6 girls in his stable. So when you look at this crime and you're like, okay, there's somewhere between 300 and 1 million women that are being sexually exploited, you do the backwards math on how many guys would that be,
Yeah.
And then it's the same thing when you're looking at how many kids are involved. So that was the point I was trying to get at before when we were talking about pedophilia. The minors are trapped in this because they're easy to manipulate. So traffickers, pimps are looking for girls that are 13, 14, 15 years old because they're underdeveloped mentally and kind of socially, but they're getting to that development physically where they can pass her off as an 18-year-old. So that really is that market when I talk about sex with minors. And that's in that space that a guy like Jeffrey Epstein was working at. He was working in that space of girls that were 14, 15, 16, 17 years old. That's automatic trafficking. If a girl is under 18, it's an automatic trafficking charge. If she's over 18, then it's law enforcement has to demonstrate an element of force, fraud, or coercion in that prostitution act. So that's another reason we hunt for minors as much as we can. It's just a much easier open and shut case for lawyers and DAs to prove. Yeah.
How can people learn more about Skull Games?
So skullgames.io is our website. We've got a brand new one coming out here any day. This one it's the one we have now is fine, but we cobbled it together. So be on the lookout for that. Did we put out the Protect Your Family course on the last time we spoke?
I don't think so.
Okay, so we have a Protect Your Family course. It's an online course. I'll send you the link to it and a coupon code. So any of your listeners that want to listen to it. Again, we're a nonprofit, and I think we charge $39 for it or something like that as another funding model. But I'll give you a coupon code for 100% off for your listeners. If people want to donate to the cause, great. But it's specifically called Protect Your Family because we talk about this crime and how you can protect yourself and your family and your community from it in some fairly reasonable ways.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I hope this gets out to a whole bunch of people. All right, I don't have a great transition for your Delta Force time. I was thinking about you obviously earlier today because I was looking forward to this conversation, and I've been through a few military courses, but nowhere near the number of military courses you've been to. And I think the list of courses that the Army offers, and forget MOS specific stuff. If you take the MOS specific stuff out, I think the list is shorter of the courses that you have not been to.
Yeah, I think that's true. It is weird, isn't it? I talk about this with my buddies. It feels not quite like yesterday, but maybe last month we were like, I want to do this, I want to do that. And then you get to this point where you're like, wow, I did it already. I went to this event the other day. I think it was back in October, and I don't really like putting my uniform on. It just feels weird. Like maybe when I'm that really old guy, like in my 70s or 80s, put the uniform back on. That'll be cool. But I went to this event to honor veterans, and a buddy of mine suggested, hey, why don't you get those little mini medals? So I bought some of the little mini medals and I put them on my suit. And it's like, yeah, it's almost like writing, even the stories that I write in a book, it's almost like a different character, and honestly, it's kind of how it is. A friend of mine, he used to work at Wharton. He now runs a mission critical teams group. Preston Klein is his name. He focused on these mission critical teams, and how he defined this was a life and death situation in a compressed amount of time. So it was surgeons, it was flight crews, it was the military, and all these different people. And then how that affected them and kind of how they would step into that. You almost become a different person. Like that surgeon, that ritual of like washing, and then they enter the surgery, the operating room. That's like a different guy, and that's how it was in combat. Like when you would go into the kit room and you would put your body armor on, you know what I mean? Or you put your helmet on and you'd put magazines in your weapon and lock and loading. It's like it was this ritual where you were turning into a different version of yourself. I just came from jujitsu. It's the same thing. It's one of the things I love about gi jujitsu versus no gi. No gi, you show up with your shirt on and your shorts, but in gi, you put this uniform on and you put a belt on and you tie that belt and you become this different version of yourself, And I think that's where one of the things, going back to Preston, Preston actually interviewed actors, because this method acting, or these actors who they become this other character, they develop a post-traumatic stress.
Wow.
Like let's say they play a villain, or they play that they lost a child. Like they get so immersed in that character that when it's over, they dream about it and they have PTS about it. And it was this interesting discussion between what a Hollywood actor goes through on pretending he's this thing, and actually what folks like us, because in many ways I was acting, right? Like I was a method actor. Like I put my kid on and I was a Delta Force troop commander. When I came home, I was dad. I was a husband. I was a weekend soccer player or whatever. So that's what I find interesting is just these different personalities that you put on. And then even getting more specific on what is that ritual to get from this version of me to this version of me. And that's another kind of line of inquiry I'll be on for a little while.
Yeah. And some of those transitions are not fast, right?
Yeah.
Like transitioning when you've gone overseas a countless number of times, and when you come home, that transition takes time.
Yeah, it does. And I think, there's no two ways to put it. I think part of it is, that goes back to what we were talking about, where I've always felt like I was a soldier. If there was a war to be had, I felt like I needed to be there, because I'm a person that can turn that on, turn that off. We used to call it like flipping the switch, so when you left work, you turned it off. When you came back to work, you turned it on, especially when you went back and forth to combat. And I think that's also one of the reasons I wrote the book, was how I coped with that was my faith. I leaned a lot on that Bible. I read a lot of Old Testament when I was overseas, because I could relate to it. I could relate to the violence. I could relate to the vengeance. I could relate to this God that demanded justice, And then when I would come home, I would read the gospel, and I could relate to this God that was a father, and and all these things. And it was these two different worlds. And that's how I coped with warfare. A lot of guys, they drank alcohol, you know what I mean? Or they did more risky behavior. They were skydiving and racing cars when they weren't in combat. They were chasing women, and they were all of these other things that they were looking for to fill that hole. And I guess, even as I'm saying it to you, as much of an adrenaline junkie I was, or desired those things, somehow, some way, just kind of that quiet contemplation of the Bible, it did it for me, And I think that's a transition some of our men and women need to make still. They're still chasing something that's dangerous. And somehow, some way, that simple little Bible and those simple little stories and, those legends and traditions and myths that all get woven in, it can fill that hole. I can't explain it, but you know it too.
Yeah. When you and I first chatted, I don't know, it's been 3 or 4 months. You wanted to talk about the problem of suicide for veterans, and you said, look, my community, the special operators that I've known for decades, in some cases, some of them are taking their lives like the conventional military, especially the Army and Marine Corps. And it seems to be the numbers are worse now than they've ever been.
Yeah, I think it's because it just simply catches up to you and you get tired. You get tired of dealing with it. As we age, our bodies don't handle it better. Well, you know what I mean? It's harder for me to recover from a workout. It's harder for me. I couldn't tell you the last time I got drunk, because it would take me 3 days to recover from that thing. Even being in a room where somebody's smoking cigarettes, it's like, so just our bodies have a harder time recovering from it. So I think, and then there's a famous book that the body keeps the score, which is it's a great book that describes how trauma it sits in your body. I'm gonna speak about it in very, very simple layman's terms. Violence that's enacted upon you, or violence that you need to enact upon others, trauma that you experience, your body, you can hide it, you can pack it away in your mind, you can build your body, but your body keeps the score. And at some point, that scoreboard will show itself. And you either need to figure out how to cope with that, and bring that deficit back down, or we've got too many men and women that are choosing to even that score by just ending it.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to get worse than it gets better. And I'm not a doomsayer on this. Again, I understand trauma, and trauma is compounding. And, when you talk about 20 years of war, there's this thing about trauma between 20 and 30 years that you just can't hold it back anymore. It's like whatever structures we build to hold back trauma begin to leak and break down. It's this phenomenon that you get all the time when these men and women come forward that were sexually abused as children. You know what I mean? They're in their 30s and they were sexually abused when they were young kids, 4, 5, 6, 8 years old. Well, if you understand trauma and you understand why that's consistency, because those memories are coming back. Whatever that bulwark is that they built to hold back that pain and that trauma, it's breaking down. And that's my fear, is these guys that have been fighting since 2001, the height of it in 2005, 6, 7, we're getting to the 20-year mark on those big days. So I think it's going to get darker before it gets lighter, unless we start talking about this. And people are, finding a spiritual grounding like you and I have found in the Bible is definitely a way. People are experimenting now with psychedelics. I've got a whole bunch of buddies that are going down and working the psychedelics. But the interesting thing is, what's happening when they're doing these psychedelics? They're hearing and seeing God. They're talking to God, and they're coming to the realization that there's something else out there, that there is this thing that they can't describe other than it's love. It's an overwhelming love, and I'm just a tiny piece of this entire thing that I didn't recognize. So maybe someday I'll do psychedelics. I mean, when those of my buddies that go and do that, one of the first things they ask you is, why are you doing this? You know what I mean? And I have a very simple answer. I want to talk to God. All these dudes have talked to God. They've had this experience, so I may go do it someday just for this mere fact that I want to talk to God. But the reality is I already do talk to God. It's just not, it's not in Technicolor, so all these guys that are going down, I encourage them to dig into it. I've never heard anything but remarkable effects and impact on these treatments that are out there. But that goes away too. Yeah.
Can we be specific? Make your broader point, then specifically what kind of psychedelics are we talking about? Yeah.
But then when those go away, you still have habits to break and you've got habits to make. And one of those habits that I think guys need to make is that person that came to you, that you talked to under the influence of those psychedelics, he left you a book. Read his book, and talk to him. So I don't know all of the different psychedelics. I mean, there is the ketamine, which is one of the things that people are using. I don't even know if that's considered a psychedelic. Psilocybin, I think there's I don't know them off the top of my head, but most of them are either synthetic or they are basically the mushrooms, and it's this. It's the peyote or whatever. I don't even know what they are, but there's a bunch of treatments now that people are authorized to go and do. So again, I don't want to speak on something I don't know. The simple point I'm trying to make is they're seeing, feeling, hearing, and being touched by God, and is changing their lives, and spending time with Him in a quiet room, in a snowy morning, on a walk in the woods, a swim in a lake, can do much of the same if you have that level of intentionality.
Yeah. No, it's well said. So I always ask guys that have been through. You're actually my first guy who's been through the Ranger process through the Green Beret process, now the Delta. I know plenty of guys that have been through Ranger. I say plenty; they're not that many actually that have been through Ranger and Green Beret. And I always ask them what was tougher from the very beginning of the Ranger process to getting through Ranger school. I don't mean any of the time in the regiment. Was that process tougher to complete, or was it the Green Beret, or was it the Delta? And if you don't want to answer, I understand.
It's really difficult to answer, because it was all a different journey, point in your journey. When I joined the Rangers and I went to Ranger Indoctrination Program, which I think was 3 weeks at the time, they call it RASMA, Ranger Assessment Selection Program. Dude, I was overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed with the violence. Back then it was rough. It was tough. It was a lot of fighting. I was overwhelmed with those things. Like it was a huge cultural shift. Ranger school, I was very young. I was in the Ranger Battalion not long when I went to Ranger school. So everything was new to me. So it's hard to equate these different things. But because then when you get all the way to Delta Force, it was like, this is why I came back in, was to go and do this. So it wasn't easy, don't get me wrong, but by this point in time, I was an athlete. I was an ultramarathon endurance athlete. The actual selection itself, the physical aspects of the selection, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't easy, but it was stuff that I had trained for and I prepared for. But it was this idea of this is what I came, this is the culmination, is to go to this unit. So you understand what I mean? It's hard to take the physical difficulty with, kind of the desire, in many of it, because I was an officer when I went through SF and RASP and selection for the unit, you only get one shot, so like that's that thing. And I say this in all humility. I loved Delta Force selection. I would do it again without that pressure hanging over me of, if you fail, you ain't coming. That was the thing that's constantly driving you, and that unknown.
Yeah. So I get why you don't want to pick one. I'm guessing the Ranger school ended up, at least from my objective outside view, was probably a little bit harder, not physically to your point, but just because you weren't prepared. Like,
yeah,
you had lived a good bit of life by the time you thought about joining Delta.
Yeah, that's a good, yeah. You picked up on that well. Yeah. Because I had prepared, like, even by the time, by the time I got to the Special Forces Q course, they do this thing called SUT phase, I think, small unit tactics, where you're doing ambushes and you're doing all these Ranger school stuff. Well, that was like old hat. Even when I went to the unit and we did some of these extracurricular type experiences, where you're going and linking up with a partisan, you're going to these meetings and all this stuff. I remember sitting down afterwards with the psychologist, and they were like, "Okay, well, what'd you think about this?" I was like, "Oh, I really enjoyed it." And they're like, "Oh, you didn't find it difficult?" I was like, "No, I mean, I just did this in Iraq for real." You know what I mean? So, that's the other piece is, by the time I got to the unit, I had spent a couple years in combat. So, like, how do you work all that? Again, it's very difficult to answer. None of them are easy, and all of them are worth trying.
Yeah. Yep. I love that answer. Look, we're going to end there. Thank you so much, Jeff, for joining me again. I'll remind people of the book as we close here. There it is. I'm gonna put a little YouTube short out there, I think, from this. I've got to get my YouTube game going. It's not consistent right now. I get these audio recordings out every single week, but I'm not on the YouTube train just yet. But maybe this will inspire me to get there.
And I'll send you the link to our Protect Your Family course to include the coupon code to pass to your listeners. And yeah, man, this is the only podcast I've done two. So I appreciate that. I appreciate having me back, and hopefully we engage your listeners again.
You've lived way too much of life to be limited to just one
podcast.
Well, one visit.
Yeah, that's
podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, once I started learning about you, I'm like, yeah, he's got a lot of things to talk about. You could come back 100 more times and not run out of things to talk about, right?
We'll do it, brother. We'll do it. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts. We'd also really appreciate if you'd rate and review us. You can find us at scodupodcast.com.